Welcome to Black Sheep Game Geeks. I'm Ash.
And I'm Alan.
And Alan's going to run us through how range works in Dust 1947.
Let's go.
Recently, someone in the community asked how range works, so in our spare time, we put together a chart to help explain it. True to form, as the perma-noob wife, before putting together this chart, I didn't really have a solid grasp of how range worked, at all. Very new to tabletop gaming before Dust. So range was kind of an enigma for me. So putting together the chart actually helped me figure some things out.
Come a long ways.
Yay. And then Alan can run us through a little bit more of the specifics.
All right. So first we'll cover the original range chart that we created that you can find on the Dust USA website in their download section. Okay, so as you can see in the original chart here, there's a white square centered relatively in the middle of what is the equivalent of two mats joined together in a standard Dust game. From there, obviously, range 1 is green, followed by range 2 in yellow, range 3 in brown, range 4 in orange, and a couple squares of range 5 in red, just to kind of help you get the idea. As you can see, in Dust, every movement in a direct line is going to be a range of 1. Hence, if you move to the right, left, forward, or back, you're going to move 1 square for 1 movement point, 2 squares for 2, and so on.
On this one, we actually expanded the range 5, so you can see it does carry out the whole way. Unlike on the little demo graphic that just gives you the basic idea, this actually shows you it continues, and it carries on as far as 6, 7, etc.
Now, where it gets a little difficult and throws off some people newer to the game is when you start moving in diagonals, both when measuring range for movement and for attacks. As you can see, if you move diagonally, again, you're moving speed 1 for 1 square. However, every square after that in a diagonal will count as 2. So as you'll see, first square is green for range 1, then the next one becomes brown for range 3, and then range 5 after that.
But what if you go diagonal and then straight and then diagonal again?
Well, the nice thing is, ultimately that first diagonal is still going to cost you 1. And then the moving straight will again be 1 again. However, you're still going to cost 2 movement for every diagonal after the first one, even if there's a couple straight directions in between. So with that, if you move from that white square, range 1 forward, you can see you can then move diagonally to the left or right for another speed 1, and it will only cost you a range movement of 2. Now, any more diagonals will in fact cost you 2 extra points, showing the range 4 on that chart as well.
So every time you go diagonal after your first diagonal, it's 2.
That is correct.
So that makes sense for things that are 1 square, but what about units that are larger, like 2 by 1, something like Cthulhu?
I knew you were going to ask about him. Everyone loves Cthulhu, unless he's chewing on your head. So when we're looking at units like Cthulhu that take up 2 squares across, 1 square deep, you'll see the chart here. Again, we have the 2 white squares that show the base of Cthulhu marching across the board, eating everything in his path. Same color coding as before. Green is range 1, yellow is 2, brown is 3, orange 4, and obviously range 5 is red. So with this, we show that with Cthulhu, 1 movement is still always going to be that 1, and so on as before. Even when moving diagonally, same rules are going to apply. 1 diagonal movement is only going to cost you 1, but every diagonal after that, regardless if there is straightaways in between, will cost you 2 squares instead.
So that counts for both attacks and movement, right?
Yes, it does. And we'll cover more about the movement on such strange-shaped bases as Cthulhu, a Sturmprinz, or Sturmkönig, some of my favorite Axis units, and other larger units in a future video to kind of go over why they move the way they do. The same thing also applies for units of a large base, no matter what configuration their base is, whether it's 2 squares side by side or one in front of the other.
And just like with units that are 1 square, the range carries on out. It doesn't just stop at 5. It carries on out 6, 7, however far you actually have range for.
Which some units do have a pretty extensive range, with ranges, while typically 8 and less, there are plenty of units with ranges like 16, or in the case of a railgun, infinite range.
I was about to say IJN.
Your favorite to fight with Cthulhu.
So the pattern holds true regardless of the base size.
No matter what the base size, range is always going to be measured as range in dust. It's always going to be a range of 1 if you're moving in a straight line. Every square is going to count as 1. However, when moving diagonal, it is always going to be the first one is 1, every consecutive diagonal, or ones after the first if there's a little bit of straight in between, is going to cost you 2. So, pretty straightforward when measuring range on just about anything.
Makes sense. So, what about height?
Cool thing with Dust is, in the United States, Dust is played almost exclusively on gridded playmats. Now, there are exceptions to that. You know, you can always play freeform at home with your friends if you want, and some events will offer an option for hardcore players that want to do gridless. But the standard rules in any event in North America is going to be on a gridded map. With that being said, range is only measured on a flat surface, in that you don't have to worry about height for your measurements. The only time the heights will come into play is whenever you have a unit hiding up on top of a rooftop or something crazy like that up on a hill, then they will get what's called height advantage. We'll cover more about that in a future video, though.
But it doesn't affect range.
Does not affect range. So, hide on those rooftops and shoot me up all you want.
So I know in some games, distance from the thing you're attacking actually affects how much your attack is worth. Does range have any effect on attack values for Dust?
In Dust, thankfully, no. No matter how far or how close you are to the unit, your weapons are going to hit them all the same, for the same amount of damage. Range is only going to determine if you have reach to hit that unit with the particular weapon. No bearing on how many dice you're going to roll or how hard they hit.
See, I love how easy that is.
It is pretty simple.
And one last question I can think of for range. What about line of sight?
Thankfully, line of sight is kind of a fun one in that it has no real effect on your range other than, obviously, if you don't have line of sight to something, you might have range to get through it, but it's not gonna matter. You can't see what you're shooting, therefore, your range ultimately will stop wherever something blocks your line of sight. So,
makes sense.
We'll cover more about line of sight in a future video again, but it'll be one of those fun things, because if you can see something and you have the range to it, you're going to hit it. However, ultimately, range is going to be totally independent from line of sight in those purposes. It's also worth noting, while we're on the range 4 slide here, that this is actually the range for an attack on one of your favorite units, the Cultist Fire Squad from the Mythos faction.
Yes.
Now, they're typically considered a low mobility and low range unit, because, well, they only have an attack range of 4. But when you look at this now, you can actually see that once that unit gets pretty center on the board, typically around where an objective might be, they actually have range to most squares on the board. And since range doesn't affect your attack values any, that's actually really cool, that even a low-range unit like that Cultist Squad is going to be able to hit most things if something isn't there to block them.
I think I legitimately didn't realize just how much reach the Mythos have until looking at these charts. Like, we were making the charts, and I had an aha moment, like a light bulb, and I was like, whoa, the Mythos actually have a lot more distance they can reach than I originally thought, so that's pretty cool. That was good news for me. The range is, like, surprisingly effective, and I always thought of them as, like, really limited by being really close to everything, so that was actually a really cool realization from this project.
Yeah, Mythos are a really potent force. They're a little bit interesting to master for especially new players. But once you really appreciate the range that those weapons can reach in a, well-placed position, they can be a very powerful force, especially when you learn how to use their monsters to back them up right.
I'm learning. So, you can find the original range chart we made on Dust USA's website, and you can find that, plus all the other ones we used here, on our website, blacksheepgamegeeks.com. Links are in the description below.
So we hope that this video has helped you understand the basics of the range rules in Dust 1947 gridded play. If you have any additional questions or any thoughts about future rule stock videos you would like to see, make sure to leave a comment below, and we will take a look at those as soon as possible and take them into consideration.
Thanks for watching and joining us for our first Rules Talk video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll see you around.
Bye, guys!
Bye. At least I got through that. I can cut right here and carry on.
Hey, Ash!
Links are in the description. I'm editing a lot of things out at this point.
Oh, God, you are.
It's a lot of words. I'll see if I can remember that.
Okay, so you were going to talk the resources about, like, you can, hey, you can find all the and put it to a different chat. Now I need to hide. I need to find this. Okay.
This is my chart dance.
Okay, chart dance. Okay.
I'm summoning the chart.